Chicagoland weather forecast. Our meteorologist, Steve Williams.
Today, rain, the high 62, with those temperatures falling into the 40s this afternoon. Clear and cold tonight. Could see some frozen spots, low 34. Times of clouds and sun tomorrow, the high 47. Rain Sunday, the high 48. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
It is 66 at O'Hare, 49 in Aurora, so you can see where the cold line is, and the rain is really coming down with heavy fog in the western suburbs. Your next news update is at 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. The debate last night opened up with President Trump and Joe Biden talking about COVID-19 response as anticipated, and there was a real philosophical difference between the two, as Trump pointed out.
I say we're learning to live with it. We have no choice. We can't lock ourselves up in a basement like Joe does. He has the ability to lock himself up. I don't know. He's obviously made a lot of money someplace, but he has this thing about living in a basement. People can't do that.
I liked that he made mention of the ability to lock himself in a basement. What have we said throughout these many months and these lockdown policies? For people
out there on frontline workers. And let us not forget what Joe Biden, I know there's a lot of single issue voters out there, moms and grandparents who are sick of e-learning, who want their kids back at school. Joe Biden is not going to let that happen.
For example, schools, they need a lot of money to be open. They need to deal with ventilation systems. They need to deal with smaller classes, more teachers, more pods. And he's refused to support that money, or at least up to now.
Did you get cliff notes from Jesse Sharkey, our CTU union president? Smaller classroom sizes, changing ventilation systems.
That's where Joe Biden is at. He's there to represent the teachers' union's position, not the kids' position.
No.
He's essentially a modern-day Al Shanker, former teachers' union boss, who infamously said, as soon as kids start paying union dues, I'll start representing kids. That's essentially the Joe Biden position. For by the way, in terms of learning to live with this, what Trump said, it's not just his own experience with the monoclonal antibody. It's also the approval yesterday of Gilead's drug remdesivir, formerly by the FDA, beyond emergency use. It's also news out, as President Trump was talking about. He's talking about American companies, but there's news out of the UK. The Oxford University AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine, quote, works perfectly and builds strong immunity, according to a study that was conducted by the University of Bristol. Dr. David Matthews from Bristol School of Cellular and Molecular Medicine, who led the research into the Oxford AstraZeneca study, quote, until now, the technology hasn't been able to provide answers with such clarity, but we now know the vaccine is doing everything we expected, and that is only good news in our fight against the illness. Sarah Gilbert, who leads the Oxford University vaccine trial, said the study confirms that large amounts of the coronavirus spike protein are produced with great accuracy. This goes a long way to explaining the success of the vaccine in inducing a strong response. And the UK's Deputy Chief Medical Officer said the National Health Service there was preparing to launch the AstraZeneca vaccine shortly after Christmas. They're still in stage 3 trials, but at this pace, with the research results they're getting back, they're talking about a mass rollout that could come as early as December. So when Trump said weeks away, he didn't mention Oxford and AstraZeneca specifically, but he mentioned other big pharma companies and their drug trials that are also producing encouraging results, including Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. So that wasn't just mindless happy talk on the matter of a vaccine. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by C. Boyden Gray, who served as White House counsel under President George H.W. Bush and U.S. ambassador to the EU under President George W. Bush. His firm, C. Boyden Gray and Associates, has represented the energy industry among other clients. C. Boyden Gray, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You recently wrote about another therapeutic that has had a rocky 6 months in terms of public acceptance because it had become so politicized. That's hydroxychloroquine. And why did you feel compelled to revisit that potential therapeutic? Well, it's not a potential; it's actually being used by emergency room physicians across the country. But why HCQ in revisiting that to the exclusion of so many other things that have now been developed?
Well, it's I wrote about it, but not just because of the election and whatnot, but because it represents an attitude by big pharma towards innovation and the Food and Drug Administration, the theory that I sort of advance, not aggressively, is that the establishment, the elite, doesn't want cheap, off-label, generic, 10-cent a pill treatment when you can make millions and billions off of drugs for which you can charge $3,000, $5,000 or more a dose.
Particularly when the government is already sort of committed to picking up the tab because of the exigencies surrounding the pandemic. And this is interesting, too, because, the perception was that initially when Trump touted HCQ, it was, well, he's being reckless. He's not listening to the scientists. There's some questions about it. Tony Fauci isn't real enthusiastic about it. And it's just seen as, well, this is just Trump talking out of his behind rather than the moneyed interests in developing other therapeutics where you can, as you say, charge more money and so on and so forth, that there's always a financial interest here, and that really hadn't been properly contemplated or reported upon by the press corps.
That's correct. That's why I wrote this piece. There have been some very strong studies. The first one that got people's attention and probably got Trump's attention, I don't know, was a study done by a very highly regarded French doctor in Marseille, and it showed pretty strong efficacy when administered with an antibiotic. That triggered a response from the media of immediate hostility, and the hostility continued on and on and on, and culminated in a big study reported by Lancet, which is the leading probably public health journal in the world, that it had no efficacy and posed heart dangers. And then a week later, they had to retract it because it was flawed, it was fake, and as the editor of Lancet said, it was a monumental fraud. So somebody was out there funding a monumental fraud in order to disqualify or undermine hydroxychloroquine, and within a week or so, the EPA, or the FDA, excuse me, canceled its emergency use authorization. And then later, two bigger trials, one from a very high regarded hospital in New York, Mount Sinai, and the Henry Ford hospital system, separately, did trials which showed similar results, 50% reduction in mortality. And the mainstream media totally ignored the Mount Sinai study, and EPA, well, the FDA, refused a request by the Ford hospital system for a limited authorization to pursue further study, especially for early use of the drug, early use in the progression of the virus, in order to bolster what they had already found. And the the FDA said, no, you can't do that. So basically, the combination of the media hostility and, which included a 8,000-word New York Times Magazine section hit on the French doctor, the French researcher, basically combination meant there could not only be no further study of this drug and its potential, but no further discussion of it.
Yeah, and look, and then the Lancet published a study that suggested that HCQ didn't work, and they had to retract that study and really embarrass themselves and hurt their credibility, despite being, as you said, the preeminent medical journal in the Western world. And it just speaks to this politicization. This came up in the debate last night with 40% of Americans saying they won't take a vaccine if a vaccine checks out, even if it checks all the FDA's boxes for approval, even for emergency use initially. In Illinois, the governor there, J.B. Pritzker, says that they're
going to have another layer of bureaucracy.
That he's going to do his own testing for any vaccine that's approved by the FDA because things have been so politicized, which, of course, is just politicizing the politicized. I talked to Dr. Jonathan Ellen from Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital, former CEO there. He said, there's no basis to do that. There's no need to do that. There's nothing that the FDA is doing from a medical practitioner's point of view, from a research scientist point of view, with respect to these vaccine trials and the protocols they've set forward for approval that is particularly questionable or obviously political. But this seems to be a new era now, and you have some perspective on this, where everything is politicized, including science. So it's one thing if you can't tell which politician is telling the truth about a particular topic. Now you can't tell which epidemiologist, which infectious disease expert is telling the truth because they've become politicized too.
That's correct, and that's very, very dangerous. And that's that's why I wrote this piece. I don't know why it's going to be ventilated, but I was thrilled when I got the request from you to discuss it further, because I do think that while the FDA probably is handling, or is, I'm sure, handling the vaccines well, these are all vaccines that make a lot of money for a lot of people. What I worry about is the speed of innovation and the speed of the production of cheaper, easier to access therapies. Remdesivir at the moment can only be administered in a hospital, and it's limited in its availability, very limited. And the drug that the president claims cured him, a monoclonal antibody, is also going to be extremely limited and available only for a very few people. But this drug, hydroxychloroquine, there are tens of millions of
doses, right?
Pills available, and for nothing, for 10 cents a pill.
And Mr. Gray, I just wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned in your piece that hydroxychloroquine's been around for 70 years as a malaria drug. A lot of people in Africa take that. Is that why there's a really low number of COVID cases coming out of Africa? Because they take hydroxychloroquine? Could it be used as a preventative?
Well, that seems to be the pattern. That's true in a couple of other countries. Yes, I think that's why it was thought, if you look back, that Africa would be probably the worst disaster of all the continents with this virus, because their public health systems are so far behind, the developed world. But they've had a much lower rate of infection than any other continent. And I believe it's because, a lot of people believe, it's because hydroxychloroquine is used so widely to control malaria.
He is C. Boyden Gray, served as the White House counsel under President George H.W. Bush and as U.S. ambassador to the EU under President George W. Bush. C. Boyden Gray, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
A storm is on the horizon, and you need to keep the lights on no matter what. Your business relies on the power being on 24/7. It's the lifeblood of your data and computer systems. Weather-related outages from the power company are not acceptable. Your need for a source of power that's reliable 24/7, along with round-the-clock service that can dispatch technicians to your site immediately, is mission critical. Your business needs Charles Equipment Energy Systems on speed dial. These are the big boys, not residential or solar, but reliable industrial generators for emergency backup or events. When you need more than a 100-foot extension cord plugged into a small engine generator, call Charles Equipment Energy Systems. They keep the lights on with rental generators for job sites or power outages. The storm season is here. Plan ahead. Call now to prepare generators for sudden damage and potential power outages. Call 630-834-6000. That's 630-834-6000 or charlesequipment.com. charlesequipment.com.
Good email on a missed opportunity for Trump yesterday on energy policy. This is interesting. I missed it too. So, this is from a gentleman named Andrew Raftis. When talking about energy, the environment, global warming, and jobs, Trump had another golden opportunity to drive home his efforts that went into the rebirth of Lordstown, Ohio, and the auto industry. Jobs in Ohio, what's not to like? Not just the auto industry, but the electric vehicle auto industry. He helped force the sale of